So, we need to kind of reorient our relationship to anger because we all have anger. It's really about healing our relationship with our anger. And that really causes us to heal our relationship with ourselves, I have found.
Hmm.
And that is primary. That is ground zero. So Freud said depression is anger turned inward. And he was so right on the money when he said that. All our mental illnesses are actually ways we dissociate from our actual feelings. And they're usually anger, because anger is the one feeling that most of us do not feel entitled to feel. We feel like it's a bad thing that makes us a bad person, that makes us an angry person.
Welcome back again to another episode of the Confident Mompreneur podcast, where we talk to real women from around the globe about real life difficulties and triumphs in momhood, business, relationships, health, and more. I'm your host, Kyrie, ready to give you real actionable advice to help you become the best, most confident version of you in all areas of your life. Let's get into it. All right. Good morning, Bronwyn. Welcome on. We're so glad to have you here.
Thank you, Kyrie. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of your team members reached out to me to get you scheduled, and they sent over your marketing profile, and I just thought it was so interesting, and I had to have you on. So do you want to start us out by introducing yourself, who you are, what you do, all of those good things?
Yes. So I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. I have a master's in counseling, and then I also have a master's in nutrition. So nutrition was my first career. I never saw myself changing career paths because yeah, I have way too much education, but what happened, my story, which very much is very interesting and can tell you more, is my family had to move during the Great Recession around 2008. And I fell into, because of that move and the loneliness that it entailed for me, I fell into a depression that I didn't even know depression could be that bad. Like, I was physically ill. I was spontaneously and involuntarily vomiting, and it was embarrassing. Like, it would be while I was walking down the street. Literally, that happened to me multiple times while I was driving. I would just throw up in my lap. So I was like, what is happening to me? And it was really hard because my husband kind of was like, what's happening to you? And he seemed like 1,000 miles away when I needed him to really meet me where I was and just look me in the eyes and go, you must be so lonely. I see the toll this is taking on you, Bronwyn, and it pains me. And he didn't know to do that. And so the depression just spiraled, and I went to one therapist. I didn't feel like she was really helpful. I went to another therapist, same thing. And I remember sitting there, this is back when it was in-person therapy, and thinking, I'm hardly functioning right now, but I am positive I would make a better therapist than these people. And so that was actually part of my recovery from that depressive episode, was going back to school and getting a master's in counseling. And I mean, I believe through, because my depressions came and went over about a decade during that time. And that my life experience, and this is in my 40s, taught me way more than the master's program. And it was helpful to have the master's program as a framework to help me understand what I experienced. But, so all that to say, now one of the things that makes me unique as a therapist is I call myself an anger expert. And the reason for that is because I see how, in retrospect, all my three major depressive episodes while we were living elsewhere were all rooted in suppressed anger. The first bout was the suppressed anger at my husband for not attuning to me, for not seeing me, for not making me feel seen. He was kind of like, go to a therapist. Like, I felt very figure it out, kind of on my own. Like it made me feel more alone than I already felt, right? So that was the first one. And then there were a couple more with different people. So now I just view not only depression, Freud said depression is anger turned inward. And he was so right on the money when he said that. But anxiety is also anger turned inward. I have come to see as a therapist now that mania is anger turned inward. Psychosis is anger turned inward. Um, these, depression isn't feeling sad. It's actually no feelings at all. And same with anxious. When my clients come to me and they say they feel anxious, I'm like, that's not a feeling. So all our mental illnesses are actually ways we dissociate from our actual feelings. And they're usually anger, because anger is the one feeling that most of us do not feel entitled to feel. We feel like it's a bad thing that makes us a bad person, that makes us an angry person. And I like to say, there's no such thing as an angry person. That's like saying she's a breathing person, because we all have anger, living on planet Earth. Whenever the real deviates from the ideal, we're going to feel angry, and that might look like resentment. That might look like frustration. That might look like annoyance. It might look like betrayal, disappointment. But those are all varieties of anger. And that's normal. And that's a normal human phenomenon to feel, some level of anger at that reality is not how it should be ideally. And that's not shameful. That doesn't make us bad. And that doesn't make us an angry person. That just makes us a human. So the first step is just to go, you know what? My anger is valid. It's here for a reason. It's like a light on the dashboard of my car saying, check the engine. Something is not doing great. Something needs repair. And that's how I view anger now.
I love that so much. I love a lot of what you said. It resonates with me very deeply. I went through a major depression episode about a year and a half ago, where I actually attempted suicide and was in the psych ward for a little bit. And looking back now, it was definitely attributed to a lot of anger of the circumstances that I was going through at that point in time. I had come out of a abusive marriage, and then a lot of my mental health showed up physically, like you were saying. I had like a cancer scare and had, to go through surgery and things like that. And then I went through a sexual assault and some physical assault with that. So there was a lot of like retained anger there, and I didn't know how to deal with or process those feelings. And I love, when I was reading through your little profile that you sent me, you talked about like a lot of people don't feel entitled or able to feel anger. Anger has such like a negative connotation to us
Yeah.
that we feel like we can't do that. And so we mask it with a lot of other feelings that just don't get to the kind of root of the cause, like you were talking about.
Yes, that really is the stem. That really is the root. And so a lot of therapists, you go to them and all they're doing is managing your symptoms, and they're not addressing the root. And that's what I experienced as a client, going to therapy. And that's what a lot of my incoming clients who've been to other therapists tell me. It's like, I'm done with managing symptoms. I'm ready to address the root. So yeah, so to say, you know what, I can feel as angry as I want. And I think that negative stigma that you're alluding to is because we only associate anger with like people who blow up and like are ragers, right?
Mhm.
And that's one form of anger, I guess, being expressed, but that's not certainly, therapeutic or good or beneficial. So, we need to kind of reorient our relationship to anger, because we all have anger. It's really about healing our relationship with our anger. And that really causes us to heal our relationship with ourselves, I have found.
Mm-hmm.
And that is primary. That is ground zero. Um, so something like a healthy relationship with anger just looks like, maybe you, when you're going through all that, just stop for a minute and you just say, you know what? I am really effing angry right now. You don't have to say that to anyone. You can just say it to yourself and just go, and that's valid. That's actually exactly what I should be feeling, because this is very wrong. Things are very, very wrong. And when things are wrong, the natural human response is anger. So starting with that, and then our feelings tell us our needs. So once we identify that we are angry, we say, what do I need? Oh, maybe I need a boundary with this person. Maybe I need just to be assertive, assertive speech. So assertive speech looks like me saying, hey, Kyrie, I am not liking that tone of voice you're using with me. So that is actually me being angry. That is me channeling my anger out of my body, where it will stay put and become stagnant and haunt me and make me sick, into words, expressing it into the ether in a way that is functional and productive. So when I say that to my husband, Steve, that tone of voice, it's not working. If you want to change it, I'm welcome to listen. So just something like that. That is anger being channeled in a healthy way. That is anger. That's what our new paradigm for anger should be.
I love that. Yeah, I think like you said earlier, anger, like when we think of anger, it's like that blowing up, explosive type of anger. But I think for a lot of us, anger shows up in different ways. I know when I get angry, I'm a crier. Like I will emotionally start crying because I'm frustrated that I like can't get that moved out of my body, and so that's the way that I do it. So, what are some of the other ways that anger kind of can show up, and what are like some of the levels of like recognition that we're actually angry and then processing that anger?
Yeah, well, I want to just remark, you crying that's a very common, I think, more female response. I'm sure there's some men who do cry when they're angry, but I want to say, I think that's because as a child, a lot of young girls learn that that is the only acceptable way to show their frustration is to cry.
Hmm.
Because
Hmm.
it's okay for girls to cry. It's not okay for boys to cry. But it's not okay for them to be angry. So they cry.
Hmm.
And you know what? It alleviates some of it, but it really ultimately doesn't. It's not enough. And so I think that is why I get a lot of clients who are just chronically anxious. It's because all they do is cry, and they've never learned to be assertive, to have a boundary, to know their anger is really actually valid. Um, so I have now, so ironically, my background again is in nutrition. I used to be of the very strong belief that if you just change your diet, you will never experience autoimmune disorders or chronic migraines or headaches or like weird GI, symptoms, issues. And I used to just really believe that. However, ironically, as perfect as my diet was for many years, I did have about 30 years on and off of really bad insomnia, like
Hmm.
really bad. We'll get back to the insomnia in a minute, but now I see that so many of my clients will have their autoimmune disorders, their chronic headaches, their chronic migraines, their chronic stomach and GI issues are absolutely resulting from suppressed anger in their bodies.
Hmm.
Absolutely. I mean, I've actually had one client where she had migraines since she was like 12. And it was just crazy because we identified 12 was when she was no longer allowed to display her anger to her parents. That was exactly the time she started hearing, like, you need to act your age. And so she couldn't act. She was entitled to show her anger until that point. And it was crazy. And even working together with her migraines, as soon as she would come to a session with like barely functioning with a migraine, and it would be completely diminished by the end of the session. It was so just um, correlated with her own anger and how she had learned to suppress it over time. So
It's
that was an
so
example.
crazy how that works together. But honestly, everything, that's why I love like doing this podcast, because seeing all of the different bits and pieces that all work together to create you as a whole. Like you can do all of the things health and wellness wise, but if you're not taking care of the mental portion of it, you're never going to be completely healthy and happy. Like me and my friend were just talking the other day that her throat was very sore and like kind of crackly and stuff, and I told her maybe it's her throat chakra acting up because she's not speaking her truth, and she just, yeah, I definitely haven't been doing that lately. So just like seeing how it shows up in our bodies is very interesting.
I would not have believed that, like, just even a few years ago. But when you say that now, I'm like, you are exactly right.
Thanks for that second.
No problem. Yeah. So yeah, I completely believe that now. I have gone from being like, oh, that's crazy to like, that is exactly right. Um, my own daughter. So on my last episode of my last podcast, I shared about my relationship with my daughter. So when I fell into, I guess we'll call it the Great Depression during the Great Recession, um, she lost me because she was 5. And anyone who knows like what depression's like and being around someone who's depressed, I became a black hole that I fell into. It was like I lost myself. And she had also experienced this move, which was like this severe uprooting. She had lost all her friends and her community, and she lost her pet, our dog that, we put to sleep just before we moved, who was like a sibling her whole life, and that's all she knew. Everything had changed for her too, but I did not attune to her. I didn't show any interest in her. And now all of a sudden, this mom is not making eye contact with her anymore because I'm like nowhere to be found. So I'm not smiling, I'm not laughing, I'm not engaging. So she felt extremely rejected by me. And our feelings of rejection are what matter, not the fact that I wasn't obviously rejecting her. She knows now, she's 20 now. She's like, you were so depressed, she sees it intellectually, but our feelings, they matter. We can't talk ourselves out of them. That doesn't work. She experientially felt rejected, and she was experientially rejected by me. So she became very angry with me, but her anger went under as well. Her anger went mostly was suppressed. So she immediately, going back to that time, she was almost 6. I look back, and that is where her bout of anxiety began. Her lifelong bout of anxiety began. Her chronic headaches, chronic stomach aches all began just at that time. And she also started treating me very differently. She started not being like a nice kid to me anymore. She kind of rejected me back. And that further contributed to my spiral of depression, because now I'm like, why is my daughter suddenly treating me like her enemy? She's only 6. Like, we're not at age 13 yet. And that was, just harder for me. But what I talk about on my podcast is the last couple years or so, I figured that out. Like, I started connecting the dots myself as a therapist. Like, how many children experience rejection and what feels like abandonment by the parent? It's usually when a second child is born, or a third or a fourth. It's usually that's like tends to be the cliche, like the first child feels abandoned. But for my daughter, we didn't have another child, but that was like that for her. That was her experience of feeling abandoned and rejected by me. So I started connecting the dots, and I wrote her an apology letter, and it was called Dear 5-Year-Old Edie. And it was a letter to her at 5. And I just apologized, and I told her how I would do it over again now. And I sent her that. I didn't hear back. I didn't even engage because I know she doesn't like to talk about these things. And then over the last year or so, whenever, because she doesn't live with us anymore, but when she when she hangs out with us, I just learned like just no talking, just listening, and be okay with the silence. Like I'm not okay with silence, but I've learned with my daughter, she needs me to be silent and not fill it up with me talking. And I have like slowly won back her trust. And she has slowly started opening up and sharing her own life with me and becoming more vulnerable with me. And I even named it recently. I even said, when that happened, you felt like I rejected you. And I just want you to know that was 100% a me problem, not a you problem.
Mm.
And she was like, oh my God, you're right. I never realized that I did feel really rejected by you. And thank you for saying that. So I feel like we finally have closure. But the good news is at age 20, her anxiety finally, after 14 years, has like diminished. Her headaches and her stomach aches are no more. And they absolutely stopped over that last year or so when I was earning back her trust and apologizing and helping her to see that was a me problem. So the hope for that, and then that's the hope there, is that her suppressed anger is dissipated now and we see it physically. My 30 years of insomnia are gone. I am sleeping at age 53 like a baby. And I feel better and more activated, more alive than I ever have in my life. And for me, I really look back and I see that as resulting from the boundary I have created with my own father in the last year, who is 83. And I don't want to have that boundary, but I need it. I need it. And I am no longer betraying myself by having that boundary for myself.
Mm.
So when we betray ourselves, I see our bodies responding by a lot of people get really tired. They're like chronically tired. And then a lot of people can't sleep. So that was my situation. So it's our bodies, like they know when we're betraying ourselves. They really
Yep.
do.
Yeah. Well, I love that you talk about that like whole dynamic with your daughter and kind of the anger that you guys both held and how it like impacted you separately, but also your relationship together. I feel like that's really hard for like, parents of adult children sometimes to recognize maybe those like childhood wounds that their kids have from something that they were experiencing during that time. Because I feel like, especially when we're in that kind of like a depressive episode, we're so focused on just like ourselves and making sure like we make it through and stay alive at that point that we don't realize the impact that it's having on, those other people around us. So when you were kind of finally working through these things and you recognize kind of that wound that it had put on your daughter through your situation that was going on, did you find yourself having anger towards yourself or, kind of putting her through that? Or what did that look like for you?
I mean, definitely, I think regret is anger that we have towards ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Regret is conscious anger that we have towards ourselves. There's also like unconscious anger that we have towards ourselves. So mine was conscious, which I think it didn't affect me because I was aware of it and I did regret it. If we're not aware and we're angry at ourselves because we've betrayed ourselves or someone else, I think it affects us more. So I think that's really important just to note that our bodies will tell us in a way
Mm-hmm.
by being dysfunctional.
Well, and like you said, like having that conscious, like self-talk inward where you're like asking those questions, getting curious about like, okay, I can see that this relationship is not where I want it to be. Like, why would that be happening? And really asking yourself those questions and kind of diving into not just what happened, but the feelings that were associated by everybody.
Yeah, and feelings are not logical. I mean, so anyone could be like, "Oh, Bronwyn, but you were depressed, but it's true. But she did feel and experience what felt like emotional abandonment from me. They can both be true at the same time.
Mhm.
One does not negate the other.
I love that so much because I do think oftentimes we feel like it's one or the other. Like both can't be true. And I think so much of life is like the duality of things. We can feel joy and anger at the same time sometimes,
Oh, yes, total. Yes. Yes. I'm glad you brought that up, Kyrie. So I have a group that I'm leading right now, and someone said, I'm not angry at my deceased mother because I love her. And I'm like, so we can't feel love and anger, or even, let's be honest, love and hate at the same time. Because if we're honest, we do. If we're honest, humans feel love and empathy, compassion, and resentment, and even hate, definitely anger, all at the same time. We are messy, messy humans. We're messy creatures, and they are not mutually exclusive. And so they're just feelings. They're involuntary. They're not right or wrong. They're not inherently good or bad. They feel good, some feel bad, but they're not, we don't need to judge them because they're involuntary. And the less we judge them, the more we just accept, okay, I kind of feel like a little hate towards my daughter right now. I'm going to be honest. It's just a feeling. What matters are our actions. If I pretend like I don't feel that feeling, my actions are going to be more likely to be hateful in some way, maybe a passive aggressive way. If I acknowledge and accept, yeah, I'm feeling kind of like really resentful and even hateful, and I'm owning it, now I can be responsible for that feeling and not allow it to impact my actions.
hmm I find that we like hold so much resentment towards other people when we're holding our feelings into ourselves. Like it it causes so many additional issues on top. Unlike like you said earlier, like if you sit down, recognize that feeling and be like, "Well, I really don't like the way I'm feeling. How can I make a change here?" And sometimes that requires, sitting down and just having a conversation with somebody and recognizing those feelings. Sometimes it requires setting boundaries. Like there's so much that can come once you acknowledge the feelings.
Yes. So our feelings tell us our needs. So I'll give you an example. My husband and I went away for the weekend and last weekend, and I was cleaning the house before we left because I'm kind of anal like that, and I wanted to come back to a clean house. And he was on board with that. However, he was still reading the paper when I was cleaning. And so I could, and he said, oh, yeah, I will in a few minutes. Let me finish. And then a few minutes passed and he was still doing that. So I said, Steve, I'm starting to feel resentful because you're still reading the paper. And he goes, oh, okay. So he got off his computer and he started helping me. So for me, I was feeling resentful, but I was responsible with my resentment. I said, what is that? What is my resentful feeling telling me? It's telling me I need to communicate it, that I'm starting the resentment now, and you can respond by starting to clean now, which he did. And which is so much better than me just letting it build. And then I'm going to act in a way I regret later.
Mm-hmm. So I love that you just like went directly to him and were like, this is how I'm feeling. Can we like work on that together? But in situations where maybe like you can't work through those feelings with the other person that you're
Yeah.
like holding on to those feelings about, like in my situation being divorced from a narcissist, obviously I'm not going to talk to him about the feelings that I hold because they're
Yes.
just going to be put back on to me.
Yes. Yes.
So oftentimes, unfortunately, they get put onto my partner now, and then I have to like work through these feelings that have nothing to do
Yeah.
with him. But
Yeah.
like also it could be a situation of like a parent that, we really had a not great relationship with that's since passed or something like that. How do we work through those things when we don't have the object of that anger or whatever available to do it with?
Okay, that is an excellent question. So, yes, so my husband is a safe person, so I can say to him, I'm starting to feel resentful. You're saying not all people are safe people, and yes, you don't want to share your feelings with them because it would be counterproductive,
Mm-hmm.
right? And those are unsafe people. So, what I do is I have my clients say in fantasy with me what they wish they could say or even could have said. So with my deceased mom, for example, what I would love, what I never got to say and really needed to say. So we can say that in fantasy. And by doing, and we say it, unfiltered, unedited, raw, we just let it out. We can do that with a fantasy letter that we write out, but we don't edit it. We don't self-edit. So a fantasy letter can be really helpful, but having someone hear it is really imperative. Someone who is not going to talk you out of your feelings, not going to defend the person, to validate you, just to be like listening and like, yeah, Kyrie, yeah, good for you. I can see why you would say that. I can see why you feel that way. So that is very cathartic. That allows our stagnant feelings to escape our bodies and go out into the ether and to feel seen and acknowledged and validated by another person. So
I
that's a start.
I love the word validation because I feel like that's something that so many of us seek. And usually that's a reason that we have anger is because we haven't been validated in our feelings for a long time. So it just like builds up to anger.
Yes, and that's exactly what makes an unsafe person unsafe is they will not ever validate our feelings. Or if they do, it's always about someone else. They'll agree with us and validate our anger at someone else, but never at them. And that is like kind of, the bottom line of what makes them unsafe is they can't be wrong. They refuse to see themselves in view of reality. They live in a distorted, delusional reality.
Mm-hmm. Very much so.
Mhm.
So as you have like gone through this process, you obviously went back to school, but I love that you said that your time before school was actually more valuable in part than your time in school. Because I also went back to school like later after I had my son and worked for a few years and things, and I thought it was super valuable. But like you went through this really difficult time, then you went through school and kind of learned like these mechanisms and like recognize some of these patterns in yourself. What has it been like for you since learning all of this, and how has it changed the way that you move through the world?
Goodness. Yeah. So school was helpful. It also, I would say is kind of unhelpful too. You learn different ideologies and theories and modalities, but you decide and you just kind of learn a little smattering of everything. So, if you're not going with the actual ones that work, which is why so many therapists are so bad, honestly, because we're not, we're given all these like different frameworks. Okay, you pick. Well, they don't all work and they're not all true. They're not all grounded in reality. Um, so I had to learn the hard way. But they will say, and I remember all my professors agreeing on this one thing, is they all said the best therapists are the ones who've done their own work and gone through their own journey. And absolutely, that is true. And I will say, I just continue to learn from my clients. Like I learn all the time, just like human nature. I honestly never would have thought people can be as evil as they are. This is a disturbing thing to say, but it's true. Um, People that you might see in the grocery store or you might see at a campground, people who are functioning, people who look on the outside like they might be just like you. And they might be just like you some of the time, but there are people who are able to do such evil, especially to their children.
Mhm.
That's where it shows up the most, unfortunately. Um, and so it's hard to witness. It's hard but at the same time, it's helped me understand my own journey as, a daughter, and again, have that boundary with my father. And I know I don't feel guilt. I feel zero guilt for that boundary with my father. I also gave him an ultimatum that he decided not to apologize, not to own or, be emotionally honest with reality. I documented, like, from age 4 till today, lots of things that are just objective truth. And I sent it to him. And he's chosen to, not see it and acknowledge reality. So that's on him. And that's why that boundary's there. I said, I'd love to have a relationship with you if you want to own this and you want to, like, apologize. And he's basically the reason for that. But, my mom also died about a year ago. I feel no guilt at saying she was a horrible person. Why should I feel guilt for that? That's not my problem. That wasn't my choice. I would have loved her to be a wonderful person, but she wasn't. So, you know, just my own journey continuing helps me with my clients who feel so much guilt about, potentially having an ultimatum with their parents or even reflecting on their deceased parents in a negative light. I'm like, who's if you're just living in reality, why should you feel guilt?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I've been witness to a lot of my friends who really hold that guilt and shame that, their parents are passed on, and they have a lot of like anger and resentment towards the things that, they went through at their parents' hands. And um I definitely think, shame is one of those things that heavily shows up when we choose not to acknowledge and work through that anger. And so I love the tools that you've provided, and, just giving permission to set boundaries, to feel our feelings, to,
Yes.
you know, just put that work in ourselves, because I think once we differentiate ourselves from those people that have hurt us when we look inwards and we work on our crap, because we were hurt at the hands of people who didn't choose to do that. And
Right.
so
That's
I
right.
think that's super important that, we now have the tools and the knowledge to be able to like be like, yeah, I'm angry. That really sucked. That was a really shitty situation that I was in.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Yes. So that what you're alluding to is what we call introspection, insight, and that takes a willingness. That takes a posture of our hearts to go, you know what? My parents were awful, but you know what? I'm kind of awful too. And I need to own that. And just having that willingness, that humility, to say, I want to do better. I'm going to apologize to my daughter. I'm going to win back her trust. I'm going to do better. That's what makes us a safe person. Not that we're going to be perfect, right? It's really about that willingness, a posture of our heart.
Mm-hmm. I love that so much. Well, thank you so much for coming on and chatting with us today. I really appreciated this conversation, and I'm sure it's going to be helpful to many of us out there. So, where do we find you? What do you have going on? All of the things.
Yeah. So my podcast is my passion project to help people who are not my clients, just to get it out there. And that is called Angry at the Right Things. And it's found wherever you find your podcasts.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Bronwyn.
Thank you, Kyrie.
Hey guys, thanks for coming to this week's episode of The Confident Mompreneur. If you loved today's episode, let us know, share to your stories and tag us, send to your friends, give us a rating, all of the things, and make sure to check out our guests and follow them on all of the links that we listed above. If you're looking for me, you can always find me at The Confident Mompreneur, and you can also check it out, www.theconfidentpost.com, for a blog relating to today's episode. I am so happy you're here, and I hope to see you again next week.